Long Way Round. Chapter 2. On Your Bike. Ewan.
Every journey begins with a single step. In our case, it was 8 years ago, when Charlie walked up to me in Casey's, a pub that was more like someone's living room than a bar, at Sixth Middlebridge in County Clare. Except for an eager and winning smile, there was nothing in the way of an introduction. "You ride bikes," he said. "Yeah," I replied hesitantly, taken aback by the gregarious, long-haired stranger in front of me. With our wives and daughters, we had moved into cottages on locations in Ireland to shoot Serpent's Kiss, a movie I will always remember fondly for the many long nights of drinking, partying, and discussing bikes. It was the kickoff party on the eve of the first day's shooting, and although Charlie and I didn't know it yet, we had a lot in common. We were both married with daughters, only a few months old. We'd both been successful actors for some time, and we were facing weeks of working closely together. There was a lot we could have talked about, but Charlie has an instinct for cutting through social niceties straight to the subject closest to a person's heart. Charlie's in-your-face affability had got the better of my reserve. Yeah, I ride a '78 Moto Guzzi," I said, referring to my first big bike, a heavy Italian machine built like a tractor. And with that, we were away. The evening dissolved into a long night of bike anecdotes and bonding over tales of fatherhood. Over the next few days and weeks, I came to realize our first meeting was typical for Charlie, who always seemed to come in a conversation from the opposite end to anyone else, an enviable trait that swiftly broke the ice. The shoot was very slow, and there was even more hanging about than usual on a film set, so we just headed down to Casey's bar, where we joined Pete Postlethwaite and other cast members playing poker, sinking pints of Guinness and harp, and spinning yarns. It was a great time and an opportunity to relax and have some fun in an otherwise quiet, small town in the middle of Ruhr Island, and the more we got to know each other, the more we found we had in common. We shared the same attitude to parenting, one of total integration of our children into our lives. As a child, Charlie had been through many of the experiences with his father, traveling the world from film set to film set, changing schools every few months, that I suspected my children would face. We got on so well that by the time of the wrap party, I had asked Charlie to be godfather to my daughter Clara. Many location friendships burned bright but short, doused soon after shooting finishing. Others turn into lasting friendships, but of the type in which we meet and speak infrequently. With Charlie, it was different. We kept in touch, and our families met up regularly. And events soon turned our relationship into something deeper than a shared passion for bikes and a good party. I had flown to Chicago and Los Angeles to make an episode of coincidentally called Long Way Round. While I was on set in America, lying in a hospital bed with tubes up my nose, by some weird and horrible irony, my Clara was being rushed into hospital in London. At first, I thought it was just a bad cold or flu, but it turned out to be a severe case of meningitis. I flew straight home to spend the next fortnight in hospital, sitting at my wee girl's bedside with my wife, Ev. It was a terrible time, and I turned to Charlie, who just before we had met in Ireland, had himself gone through a difficult period when his eldest daughter, Dawn, had been severely ill with a white blood cell deficiency. Charlie and his wife, Ollie, were a great support. One afternoon after Charlie had visited us at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, I saw him out. It was so serious what was happening to Clara upstairs. Charlie could see how it was grinding me down, and he knew how awful it was to be in hospital like that with your child. He turned to me and simply said, It's okay. It can get better. He reminded me that all children get ill, and at some stage many children become very ill. Out of everyone I knew, Charlie understood just how frightening and isolated it can be if you are dealing with your children's illness all by yourself. He knew just what to say. He gave me a big hug, then swung his leg over his Honda XR 600R, pulled out into traffic, lifted the front wheel, and hoiked a huge wheelie all the way down the Fulham Road. Something about that really got through to me. That wheelie was so brilliantly inappropriate and spontaneous that it cut through my anxiety and worries, lifting my spirit more than any words could have done. And it was very much in keeping with Charlie's true spirit of optimism. It was a strange period, but I'll never forget Charlie roaring away on his back wheel. Just when I needed it, he really cheered me up, and in that moment, our friendship was sealed for good.
Charlie.
When I met Ewan in Casey's in 1997, I immediately recognized a kindred spirit. Someone with big passions in his life and with biking at the center of them. I've been obsessed with bikes for as long as I can remember. Growing up on a farm in County Wicklow in Ireland, there was a guy just up the road who had a motorbike, and I always saw him bombing past. I was about 6 years old then, and I just thought, wow. Around that time, my father, John Borman, was filming Zardoz in Ireland with Sean Connery, who was staying at our house during the shoot. One weekend, Sean's son Jason came to visit. Jason was quite a bit older than me and spent most of his stay forcing me to push him up and down the drive on a little monkey bike. Eventually, long after I had got the bike started and Jason had spent a long time riding it around the farm, he let me have a go. I promptly fell off, but that one moment, that twist of the grip, that roar of the engine, that smell of the exhaust and the petrol and the thrill of the speed was enough. I was hooked. I pestered my parents to indulge my nascent passion. Before long, I persuaded them to let me buy a motorbike, a Yamaha 100 miniature trails bike that I've kept to this day and which I bought with my earnings as a featured extra in The Great Train Robbery. It was fabulous. Most days I would see a neighbor shoot past the farm on a Mako 500, an Italian bike that was the best thing around in those days. Tommy Rockford, the man on that bike, soon became my idol. His father, Danny, was a master gardener who looked after my parents' gardens. Like his father, Tommy was kind and generous, but most importantly, he let me ride up to his house on my bicycle and tinker with his Mako. Tommy would lift me on to the bike, start it up, and hold it upright until I moved off. I was small at that time, and my feet did not reach the ground, but I would go flying around the field until I'd had enough, at which point I would race towards Tommy, slam on the brakes, and as the bike dropped to the deck, leap off. By the time I was 12, I had a 125cc, and like Tommy, I was into motocross whenever I wasn't making films. At about the time I got to know Kaz Belinsky, a fellow motorbike mechanic in the making who lived across the river from our farm. Kaz, who had a Yamaha YZ80, had built a motocross trek that soon became Tommy's and my primary destination. We would race our bikes down to the bottom of my parents' fields, through the river into the Belinsky's field, and up the hill to Kaz's motocross track, where he would bounce around the circuit, racing, tumbling, and falling until it got dark. A couple of years later, I wanted a bigger bike, a 250cc. My dad said it was too big and I was too young, but I persisted and eventually I became the proud owner of a Yamaha YZ250. The day I first climbed onto that 250, my father was out playing tennis with a neighbor. The bike was all I had ever wanted, and I was determined not to be intimidated by its size and power. I shot along a dirt track and raced past the tennis court, hoiking a huge wheelie in defiance of my father as I passed by, glaring at my dad as if to say, "Look, I can ride this thing, you see." I felt blissfully pleased with myself until I looked ahead to see a stone wall topped by barbed wire looming up only a few feet away. I slammed the bike down and hauled on the brakes. But it was lush, green grass almost knee-high, and there was nothing doing. I was going to slide. I felt the bike slip away beneath me as I skimmed across the grass, hit the wall, bounced over it, and wrapped myself in barbed wire. My father came running up to me as I lay helpless on the ground, but the look in his eyes told me there was no way he was going to help me. Standing above me, he shouted in my face, "You fucking idiot. I told you you were too small for that thing." With the bike beside me, its engine still thundering away, there was little I could do but plead forlornly. "Yeah, okay, but can you just get this thing off of me?" Shortly after that, I sold the Yamaha and got another 125cc. My father was right. The YZ250 really was just too big. But before I waved it goodbye, I went out for a spin on the roads with Tommy's brother Kevin, who had a fully equipped road bike, whereas my YZ250 was an untaxed motocross machine with no lights. So I strapped a torch onto the front. Having spent a few hours riding through the Wicklow countryside, I came to a junction, the turning for the road home. There, standing in the middle of the road, was Sergeant Cronin, the local policeman. His arms were folded on his chest, and he had a stern look on his face. I was baffled. How had he spotted us? Simple, he said. He had stopped to examine an abandoned car and noticed going up the hill a white light, a red light, a white light, and no red light. He thought it was a simple case of pulling the rider over to tell him that his rear light was not working. But then I came shooting around the corner. Bang! Done. Sergeant Cronin looked at me with one eyebrow raised and just murmured quietly in his soft Irish brogue, "Charlie, Charlie, Charlie, tisk, tisk, tisk. What the feck are you doing?" I didn't even have my helmet off. How could he have known who I was? I never found out. He went through the whole process. 14 offenses, no tax, no insurance, no license, riding with illegal tires, illegal bike, not a proper helmet, insufficient due care and attention, and so on, not to mention the torch strapped to the bike as a front light. Sergeant Cronin ordered Wicklow's most wanted to head back immediately. But I was in the middle of nowhere, about 7 miles from home, so I started pushing the bike. He was having none of it. "Get on your bike and drive it straight home," he said. "You're in serious trouble." Time I got home, Sergeant Cronin had already rung my dad, who was really pissed off. Striding into the living room, he threw the phone book at me. "You'll need a lawyer," he snapped. "Look it up yourself." "But Dad, I'm dyslexic," I whimpered, the tears rolling down my cheeks. "I don't even know how to spell it." It took a long time for my father to stop ribbing me about it, but even after 2 run-ins with him, my passion for motorbikes remained undimmable. Soon after the encounter with Sergeant Cronin, I was headed up to Tommy Rockford's house in my usual manner. I would come out of our driveway and jump on my motorbike, sitting side saddle as I rode up the hill so that if someone spotted me, I could jump off and pretend I was walking. This time, I came screaming up the hill doing about 30 miles per hour, when Gerda Jackson, Sergeant Cronin's superior, stepped out of the village shop. There was no time to brake. I jumped off the bike. Gerda Jackson looked around to see me running flat out uphill, trying to keep up with my bike. I knew it was a fair cop, but to my amazement he just stood there and shook his head. He was speechless. It was only a few days after I'd been let off by Sergeant Cronin, and here I was, taking on the law again. "Charlie, what the hell are you doing?" he bellowed when he'd come to his senses. I expected the book to be thrown at me, but Garda Jackson turned a blind eye, and for many years my motorcycle escapades continued in the same vein, evading the law until I passed my test when I was about 21 and living in London. Then I got my Kawasaki Zephyr 750, my first big bike.
Ewan. My bike baptism can be summed up in 2 words: teenage love. My first girlfriend was petite, with short, mousy blonde hair, a smile that was as wicked as her character, and I was mad about her. Whereas I was a day pupil, she was a boarder at Morrison's Academy, our school in Crieff, a small Perthshire town. She and I went out for a while when I was about 13 or 14. Her personality was a beguiling mix of contradictions, and maybe that was why I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was very sweet-natured, but at times she could be really hardcore, quite a tough cookie. Her right breast was the first girl's breast that I ever touched, in a bush off Trummond Trace. Then she went off me. We were on, we were off, we were on, we were off. So whenever we were off, I went out with lots of other girls. That's what you did in my school, but I always came back to her. Our on-off romance came to an abrupt end, however, when she started going out with another guy from Ardvrak, the other school in Crieff. He rode a 50cc road bike first and then a 125. And whereas I had always walked my girlfriend back to Ogilvie House, where she boarded, and snogged her at the gate, suddenly she was going back with this guy. He would meet her at the back gate, snog her, and then he would go screeching around Ogilvie House on his motorbike all night long. It drove everyone to distraction. He was doing it for her, and I knew what he felt like, and I knew what it made her feel like. I was nearly 16 by then and already heartbroken. Then one day, on the way back from a shopping trip to Perth with my mum, we passed Buchan's, the local bike shop. I urged my mother to stop the car. I got out, walked up the hill to the shop, and pressed my nose to the glass. There was a little blue 50cc bike on display right at the front of the shop. I didn't know what it was or if it was any good. Such trivialities were irrelevant to me. All I knew was that I could get it in 3 or 4 months' time. I could ride it at 16 and maybe even get my girlfriend back. I'd ridden my first bike when I was about 6. My father Jim was chairman of the Crieff Round Table and had organized an event for disadvantaged children. It was a kind of Jim'll fix it, and one small boy's fix-it was to ride a motorbike. My father organized a wee red Honda 50cc, and we headed off to a field that belonged to a family friend. After the kid had a go, they asked me if I wanted a ride. Of course I did. I clambered on and shot off. It was just a twist and go, and I went all over the field. I thought it was just the best thing. I loved the smell of it, the sound of it, the look of it, the rush of it, the high-pitched screaming of the engine. Best of all, there was a Land Rover parked next to 2 large loads of straw bales, with about 1.5 meters between them. I knew that from where the adults were standing, it looked as if there was no distance between them, just one large heap of straw. I thought I would have a go. I came racing towards the adults, shot right through the gap in the straw bale, thrilled to hear the adults scream, and elated that it had frightened them witless. It was my first time on a motorbike, and I wanted more. A few months later, my Uncle Kenny turned up at the house with a motorbike and rode me up and down the drive on it. That just made me hanker for one all the more. Motorbikes had become my object of desire. So when I looked through Buchan's window in Perth that day, it suddenly made sense to me. It was what had to happen. I needed the bike to be able to ride around. I can't remember whether it was to win my ex-girlfriend's heart or not, but more than anything, it meant that instead of having to walk everywhere, I could ride my motorbike to school and the games fields at the bottom of Crieff, and when I went out at weekends. I knew what had to happen. Somehow, I had to have that bike. I started to fantasize about it. I spent all my waking hours thinking about getting on and starting up the bike, donning the helmet and riding around Crieff. I couldn't sleep. Driven to desperation by my desire for a bike, I made a series of promises to my mum. I won't leave town. I'll be very safe. I won't take any risks. I won't do anything stupid. But in truth, I was making it up as I was going along. Crieff is built on a hill. It's a small town and I used to walk everywhere. It takes less than half an hour to walk from one end of the town to the other. My whole childhood was spent walking around the town. From my parents' house to school to friends' houses. It was great, but I was getting to the age when children became aware of the possibilities of venturing further afield. Crieff is smack in the middle of Scotland, only 50 miles north of both Edinburgh and Glasgow, and no more than a day's drive from anywhere in the country. Unless, like us, you went everywhere by bicycle. With so many beautiful places within easy striking distance, the idea of getting a motorbike was too much to resist. I asked my mother, promising and bargaining the world just for the chance of having a bike. I'll only go 30 miles an hour. Just please let me have the bike, I begged. I'll speak to your father, Mum replied. I thought there was a vague possibility, a glimmer of hope, but my parents never gave in. I just wasn't allowed. If something happened to you, I couldn't possibly forgive myself, my mother told me. She was probably right, too. When Charlie and I visited her during a 4-day trip to Scotland that served as the dress rehearsal for our round-the-world journey, I showed Charlie the Buchan shop window where I spent many hours gazing longingly at the little 50cc bike. Charlie teased my mother. Dreadful parents, all that denial, denying his need as a man to straddle the motorbike. But my mother didn't rise to Charlie's bait. You see, when he was 16, he was a bit. He would probably have fallen off, and then he might not be going round the world now. I might not be here at all, I chipped in. So maybe we did the right thing, Mum said. You definitely did the right thing, I told her. And she had. At the time that I was begging for a bike, I'd already had a close scrape with a 100cc 4-stroke belonging to George Carson, the school laboratory technician. I was playing Sganarelle in a school production of the eponymous Molière play. During a break in rehearsal, I casually popped the question to Mr. Carson. Can I have a go on your motorbike, sir? Yeah, of course, he replied, not knowing I didn't have a clue how to ride it. The bike was in a wee alleyway up the side of the refectory building that doubled as the school hall and theater. I managed to kickstart it, but unable to control the clutch, stalled it 3 times. On the 4th attempt, I took off on the bike, zooming down the alleyway until I crashed smack into a wall, bending the wheel and snapping the handlebars. Mr. Carson came out to find me looking very red-faced. The bill for the damage came to more than £80, a fortune for a 14-year-old in those days, and one that took me months of working as a dishwasher and waiter at the Murray Park Hotel to pay off. So when my mother refused my pleas for a bike, part of me understood her concerns, but the rest of me knew there was something missing. Spiritually, I was already a biker, but I just didn't have a bike. A year or so later, I left home for drama school. First to Fife for a year and then down to Guildhall in London. where I soon became friends with Jeremy Spriggs, another aspiring actor. When I was 19, Jeremy took me to a country pile that belonged to someone he knew in Cambridgeshire. There, in a dilapidated shed, I found an old off-road bike. It was broken, with its engine in a plastic bag and the rest of the bike in bits. But it was a bike. That was all that mattered. Determined to buy it and get it working, I paid Jeremy's friend £150. When we got it back to London, Jeremy took it away to get it fixed. A few days later, he told me it couldn't be repaired. It was gutted. Jeremy had probably spoken to my mum. He didn't want me to have it, knowing that if I killed myself on it, he would feel responsible. Another bike had slipped through my fingers. As soon as I graduated from Guildhall and started working, I headed to a bike shop in Kentish Town in North London. For years, I had frequented bike shops just to look at bikes and gear and all the stuff that goes with biking. To this day, I will quite happily read motorcycle catalogs about gloves and foot pegs, biker porn. Sitting in that shop was a Honda 100cc bike that I could ride on a car license. I bought it straight away and loved it. I rode it everywhere. I would go to parties on it, to auditions, absolutely anywhere. For the first time, I felt totally independent. I didn't need to go on the tube, and I wore all the gear. One day I was sitting in traffic coming down the hill from Hampstead Heath. I was dressed like the archetypical greasy biker, denim jacket, leather jacket, an open-faced helmet with goggles. I really looked the part. And approaching me, on the other side of the column of traffic, was a very cool rider, dressed almost the same. As he drew level, Zen Biker nodded over to me across the top of a car bonnet to say, "How you doing?" I nodded back. The lights turned green, and we moved away. As the traffic cleared, Zen Biker could see that while he was sitting on a big Harley-Davidson, I was straddling a wee Honda 100cc. His withering look could have shriveled a pomegranate. I was mortified. That embarrassing episode only strengthened my resolve to get my biker's license to buy a larger bike. The day I passed my test, I hot-footed it to a bike shop in North London and bought a very old 1970s Moto Guzzi, sold to me as a Moto Guzzi Le Mans. I loved the look of it, but it turned out to be a far cry from the salesman's claims. It had clip-on bars and it was in the racing position, but it was like riding a tractor. It was a dog. Someone had obviously traded it in, and I bought it because I liked the way it looked and because I really didn't know anything about bikes at the time. But I had just passed my test. I was desperate to ride a big bike, and it was perfect for me. Noisy, oily, good-looking, and messy. My only regret about the Guzzi, which I restored and customized until it was a beauty, is that I eventually sold it. The only problem was what to do with the Guzzi when my parents visited. I was living the life of Riley in a bachelor pad in Primrose Hill. I partied every weekend from Friday night, when I would meet my friends in town, to Sunday evening, when all the parties would invariably wind up at my flat. At about this time, a beautiful Australian girl, Elska Sandor, moved in upstairs. She was studying textiles, but all she wanted to do was design skateboards. She introduced herself. I had been too embarrassed to speak to her because I was always at the tail end of a weekend's partying whenever I bumped into her, and we became good friends. Every time my parents came to visit, I would rush upstairs to Elska's flat with all my biking gear, helmet, gloves, clothing, magazines, and hid it with her. For several years, my parents blissfully walked past my bike, chained to a lamp post outside my flat, never realizing it was mine. At about this time, while filming an episode of Kavanaugh QC, I met a beautiful French production designer. I fell head over heels in love with Eve Mavrikas, and we married soon after. From the very early days of our romance, Ev made it clear that she didn't care for bikes at all. She thought they were dangerous, and if Ev seriously asked me to stop riding, I would hang up my leathers. But she knows that bikes are my passion, and because of that, my wife has always tolerated my bike riding. Even when Clara was born, Ev didn't place demands on me. While Clara was still a little baby, I met Charlie, and thanks to his friendship, became an even more fanatical biker. Not long after Charlie and I met, I began work on The Phantom Menace, the first of the Star Wars prequel, and met up with Charlie and some of his biker mates. They were all on sports bikes, and Charlie had one too. I could see how much fun they were, but it wasn't until Sasha Gustav, a Russian photographer friend, lent me his sports bike and I found out for myself. It was the first brand new bike I had ridden. I was used to riding my old Guzzi, and I was in for quite a shock. Going down Haverstock Hill in Hampstead, I pulled away gently from the lights and looked down at the speedometer to discover I was already doing 80 miles an hour. Alarmed at the speed, I hit the brake and stopped almost instantly. I was gobsmacked. Sports bikes excel at what they do in the most exhilarating way. I decided there and then to get a new bike and to make it a sports bike. And as I had a bit of cash from making Star Wars Episode 1, I thought I'd get a brand new Ducati 748. When the shooting started at Levingston Studios north of London in Hertfordshire, I embarked on an all-out campaign to get the Ducati, importing it from Italy through James Wilson, a friend of Charlie's who ran Setup Engineering, a racing suspension specialist in South London. Importing the Ducati from Europe made it slightly cheaper, but I had to pay cash. Every few weeks, I would bowl into the Star Wars accounts department at Levingston and ask for an advance, taking out many thousands of pounds each time. It was a lot of cash to ask for against my wages, and it all had to be authorized. They were making Star Wars, and all I was thinking was about this wonderful Ducati. One afternoon I got a phone call from Rick McCallum, the producer and George Lucas's right-hand man. He wanted to speak to me about the bike. My first thought was, oh fuck, I'm in trouble. I guessed I had taken out too much money, as if the Star Wars producers didn't have that much cash. But guilt is always the first response, and I thought I had done something wrong. I went up to the producer's office, knocked on the door, and walked in. Rick was waiting.
George and I wanted to know how much this bike is costing you,
he said. I told him how much, thinking I was about to be castigated for bothering the production accountants.
George and I would like to buy it for you,
Rick said. I was stunned. For the next few years, I rode around on what was in effect George Lucas's bike until I passed it on to Charlie, who rides it to this day. It was quite ironic that George Lucas bought me the Ducati. My contract usually forbids me from riding a bike while shooting a movie. The only location where I was allowed to ride to work was Australia. I spent almost 2 years there on and off, shooting Moulin Rouge and the second and third Star Wars episode. Working in America, where I had to take the company limousine or drive by car to the studio, had driven me nuts, so when I first met Baz Luhrmann, the director of Moulin Rouge, I told him that if he wanted me to sign up for 8 months to rehearse and shoot his film, a much longer period than the usual 3 months a film takes, I had to be allowed to ride a bike. I act. I am with my wife and kids, and I ride motorbikes. That's it. That's all I do, I said. If you don't let me ride a motorbike for 8 months, it's like forbidding me to listen to music. It's that big a deal to me. I cannot stay off bikes for 8 months. I made it clear to Baz that in my eyes, it was unreasonable and unacceptable, and somehow in Australia, they got their insurers to okay it. Midway through the 8-month shoot, I rode off into the outback, It was the first time I had done a solo bike tour to get away from a movie set. I was having a great time making Moulin Rouge with Nicole Kidman, but I was surrounded by people every day and I needed a break. Before I left, everyone in the cast and crew, including Baz and all the producers, showed me maps and suggested routes. It was unheard of for a leading actor to take off on a bike in the middle of a movie, and they were scared stiff. But there was nothing they could do about it. I needed to make decisions for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. I rode for several hours, camped, and after pitching my tent, I just stayed there. I didn't do anything, just sat in the field beside a tent for a day, keeping the fire going. I fell asleep and woke up at 4 a.m, staring at the stars, lying in the grass next to the burnt-out fire. It was just what I needed. I did nothing, but that was my decision. No one to pick me up at dawn and tell me what I could have for lunch. No one telling me to stand over there, to say this line, or to do that. Filmmaking is a fantastic experience, but the technicalities are deadly dull. It's boredom peppered with moments of passion. When I leave work on a motorbike, pull on my helmet and move off, it doesn't matter if I've had a good day or not. With no phones, no stereo, and no traffic to sit in for 40 minutes, contemplating what happened during the day, I am concentrating so hard on what I'm doing and where I'm going, and making sure that no one is pulling out to kill me, that by the time I get home, my mind has been cleared of any troubles. Motorcycling gives me anonymity, and I don't have much of that in my life. It's an escape from being stared at. When I'm flashing around on my bike with my helmet on, I'm just another geezer on the road, and that's nice. But above all, there's something about riding a bike. The concentration and the single-mindedness of it, and the desire to get it right. Taking a corner fast without losing control, doing it beautifully, winning the battle between your head telling you to do one thing, the bike wanting to do another, and your body in between. That I miss like hell if I don't get to ride it every day. I walk into the house, and I'm chilled.
Charlie, for most bikers, commuting around town is never enough. The urge to go faster and farther takes over, and the open road beckons. For years, I would get up early on Sunday mornings to meet hundreds of other bikers at a petrol station near Box Hill, south of London, shortly after 6:30 a.m. By midday, we would have burned down to the south coast, down to fry up breakfast, and race back to London for lunch with the family. Whenever I had a couple of spare hours, I would head for the roundabout south of the river at Watersworth Bridge or beneath the A40 at White City to practice my cornering, circling again and again to see how low I could get my knee down. Clocking up 30 miles or more each session, orbiting for hours until I would achieve a perfect lap. When you're leaning over and it's really hot, worn rubber builds up on the edge of the tire. It means everything to a biker, and I would get to a point where I would be going around for so long that when I pulled up to go straight, it all felt really wrong. The whole bike felt lopsided because I had become used to hanging down just one side. On trips across London with Ollie and our daughters, Donnie and Kavara, I would shoot ahead on my bike. As Ollie negotiated roundabouts, she would pass me and see me in her mirror going round and around. Then my headlight would appear in her mirror as I approached, pulling a wheelie and grinning wildly at the kids as I drew level before racing past. But my obsession with bikes and speed was accompanied by increasingly close scrapes with injuries and a series of almost fatal accidents. Days after returning home from shooting Serpent's Kiss in Ireland, I set off with about 15 other bikers, one a scaffolder in his early 20s, another the retired chairman of ICI in his 60s, for the 24-hour superbike race at the Paul Ricard racetrack in southern France. After a long and tiring first day eating up the miles through northern France, we spent the night at a cheap hotel and departed early the next morning, hoping to make the racetrack at La Castellette, a tiny village in Provence, by midday. The afternoon before I had been right on the pace, but shortly after we set off, I hit a little wet patch and just felt the front end tuck and lose its grip. It made me nervous. I had a hangover from a few too many drinks the previous night, and I was struggling to regain my feeling for the roads. The road was narrow and twisty, with a succession of switchbacks, but continued round for almost 3/4 of a full circle. Concentrating intensely on the road in front of me, I looked up to find I was on the wrong side of the road with a car coming straight towards me. Clouds of blue smoke and the stench of burning rubber filled the air as we both slammed on our brakes. Gritting my teeth, I tightened my grip on the bike lever and prepared for the worst. Seconds before impact, we both came to a standstill. My front tire was just inches from the car's front bumper. I looked through the windshield to see a middle-aged father with his wife and 3 kids staring back at me, the look on his face a mixture of obvious relief, blind fear, and outright indignation. I knew just what he was thinking. What the fuck are you doing? In the enjoyment and excitement of a fortnight devoted to the adulation of motorbikes at the Paul Ricard racetrack, I soon forgot the close encounter. But my next scrape, a year or so later, was much more serious. Racing along twisty country roads with a mate, I entered a corner far too fast. We were traveling at 100 miles an hour, and I knew there was no way I was going to come out of that hairpin in one piece. Looking around for an exit route, I spotted a clear runoff directly ahead. Good news. Maybe I would survive the inevitable crash after all. Then I noticed a tiny little lip at the edge of the tarmac. At a safe speed, I would have passed over it without incident, but at more than 100 miles an hour, it was going to cause serious trouble. Moments later, my front tire hit the lip, dented the rim, then the back wheel went over it and the rear swing arm snapped. The bike went down and it completely disintegrated, leaving me lying on the long grass with the remnants of the bike still beneath me. Charlie, where are you? It was David Healy, one of the many riders I used to meet for those Sunday morning burn-ups to the coast. Dazed, bewildered, but still alive, I popped up from the grass like a startled meerkat. Bits of bikes were scattered in a wide circle around me, and one of my shoulders hurt like hell. I had damaged some ligaments and broken a 4-inch thick fence post. But it was the bike, not me, that was written off, and for me, that was much more galling.
Charlie,
David said again,
you need a track day. You can do all this much faster, but in an environment where there's less chance of you killing yourself.
My first day at Snetterton, a simple, fast 2-mile racetrack built on a Second World War airbase in Norfolk, was a revelation. It was the only time in my life that I ended a day thinking that if I had known about this when I was younger, I would have made a career of it. I'd had a fabulous time, but it was also a terrible moment. I realized what I really wanted to do with my life, but I was too old to do it.
Ewan. I soon followed Charlie onto the racetrack. I'd had fewer close calls than he had, although exaggerated accounts of my falling off a Honda Blackbird had made the newspaper, which reported that I had narrowly escaped a fatal 180-mile-an-hour collision on a tour of the Scottish Highlands with my father in March of 1999, when I should have been at the Oscars ceremony in Hollywood. In fact, in that instance, my rear wheel had slipped sideways on a diesel spill, tipped me off the bike at about 30 miles an hour as I was exiting a roundabout more than a week after the Academy Awards. I was never very good at being fast on the roads. I had near misses where I had strayed over to the other side of the road as I was going around a corner, inwardly screaming, "Oh my God," as a car was coming towards me. And I had thought it was just stupid. I remember looking in the windshield of an oncoming car, seeing the bewildered face of the driver, and my only thought was, what for? I was just trying to keep up with the rider ahead of me. Riding fast on a racetrack makes sense. You're never going to meet someone coming the other way. My first track day was an event organized by Ducati at the Brands Hatch Indy Circuit. Carl Fogarty, the legendary four-time World Superbike champion, was to be there, and Ducati, knowing I rode a 748, had asked me to join them. Arriving at Brands Hatch on my bike, I found the flies had broken on my particular garish two-piece leather suit given to me by Bike Magazine. I acquired the leathers after doing a photo shoot on my Moto Guzzi for them. Asked what color I wanted, I said, well, my bike's yellow, so maybe something yellow and black. I was actually thinking of something predominantly black with a little bit of yellow piping. Then the suit arrived. It was like a diagonal checkered flag, all yellow and black squares, like a rotten banana. The boots looked as if someone had splashed luminous paint all over them, pink, purple, and green, absolutely awful. The gloves were no better, and if I was turning up for a track day, my first ever, with a bunch of bike journalists, many of whom are complete nutters on bikes because they are paid to thrash the living daylights out of them, and my flies were gaping wide open. Someone gave me some silver gaffer's tape. I taped it over the crotch of my yellow fluorescent nightmare leather suit. It wasn't the greatest look. The journalist pestered me with questions about how I was feeling. I was so sick with fear and anticipation that I just wanted them to leave me alone and ask me questions afterward. Ducati paired me off with the oldest participant. As we walked down the track, he asked me how fast I was. "Oh, pretty quick," I replied. The old guy told me he was worried about the pace. "Well, just take it steady at first," he suggested. We eased out onto the track. I tucked in behind him, and then he and all the other biking journalists disappeared, just evaporated into thin air. Taking it easy, apparently. It left me thinking that if that was taking it easy, then I didn't stand a chance. And so it was for the first session of 8 or 10 laps. I hadn't been riding bikes for long enough to know the essentials. What gear to be in, how to keep the racing line, and how to make a bike really move. But the learning curve is very steep on a track day, and it didn't take long to learn the ropes. Hanging off the bike, your backside nearly scraping the tarmac, is a very strange thing to do. But it's the most exhilarating experience I've ever had, one that becomes more technical and less frightening as it goes on. Even now, after many track days, my nerves will be shredded before the first session of the day, because racing is all about telling your brain to ignore its natural instincts, particularly on corners, resisting until the very last moment, braking as late as you can, the whole back end of the bike lifting, trying to overtake itself as the struggle to do everything as smoothly and gently as possible, while your brain screams at you to slow down. It's a fabulous feeling when you get it right. However, riding a bike is not just about going flat out fast. It's also about taking your time, steadily eating up miles, cruising the highways, letting the road take you wherever it's going, and not worrying about the destination, just enjoying the journey. Whenever I can grab the chance, I get on my bike and take off for a few days. A few years ago, I rode from London to my parent-in-law's home in northeast France. I didn't want to be recognized, so I shaved my head into a mohawk in the hope it would be enough to ensure that I was left alone. After a day riding through central France, I stopped at a campsite at the Tarn Gorge and put up my tent. dressed in shorts and a vest, with my 6-inch mohawk and a large, freshly tattooed heart incorporating my wife and daughter's names on one bared shoulder. I entered the local bar. Sipping a drink at the bar, I planned on staying another few days to do some sightseeing and relax. I was just about to ask the barman if I could book a table that evening when a customer at the bar gave me a look that made me want to leave immediately. He looked at me as if I was a piece of dirt, with real hatred in his eyes. With a gaulish wedge between his thin lips, this Frenchman, quietly smoking at the bar, clearly thought I was despicable, worthy only of his contempt because of my appearance. It shocked me that one person could look at another with such hatred, and all because I had spiky hair. I crossed the road to a restaurant with dozens of empty tables inside and outside. I walked in and asked for a table for later that evening. The waitress looked at the barman. They both looked at me, silent for a few seconds, and then she said simply,
None.
I couldn't believe it. What was she thinking? It's just for me. Pour moi.
None.
How about out of sight?
None.
I crawled back into my tent and went to sleep hungry and thirsty, surrounded by hundreds of happy British holidaymakers. Because of their presence on campsites across France, I'd shaved my head into a mohawk to avoid detection. My disguise had succeeded so comprehensively that now I couldn't even buy a meal in a local bar. In a week of traveling around the country, I didn't think I was recognized once, but shunned by restaurants and barkeepers across France. I soon became very lonely and hungry and rolled up to my parent-in-law's house several days earlier than intended. A few years later, shortly after I had finished shooting big fish in Alabama, I encountered a similar experience. Wanting to ride to Los Angeles before flying home to London, I bought myself a big Harley-Davidson road glide and headed for Oklahoma to cruise along one of the few remaining stretches of the original Route 66. 3 days into the journey, I arrived at Elk City, a mythical Route 66 destination, far off the beaten track, stuck in the 1930s time warp, and immortalized in Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl ballads. I stumbled into an old pool hall, wishing I had someone to play with at one of the dozens or so empty tables. Oozing authenticity and history, it had the stars and stripes in one corner, and it made you want to stand there with your hand clutched to your chest humming the Star-Spangled Banner. A young guy was playing pool with a girl, and a trio of good old boys were sitting at a table at the far end, playing cards. Next door was a gun store with 2 signs in the window. We don't dial 911, and we keep Indian time. And further down the road was the Elk City Holiday Inn Express. Having taken in the pool hall, I pulled up outside its front doors. A force 5 wind had been blowing all day, and I'd been riding at a tilt of about 45 degrees since getting on the road. I was exhausted, in need of food and a bed.
Can we help?
The manager asked. Yeah, I'm just looking for a room, I said, asking for a double to get a larger bed.
No, we're full.
Outside, the parking lot was empty. It was late afternoon, and there wasn't a single car to be seen. Really? Haven't you got anything?
We're full.
I crossed the road and took a room in a motel. A few months later, on The Jay Leno Show, I mentioned being turned away from what appeared to be a totally empty Holiday Inn Express. Jay invited me back on his show to publicize LongWayRound in December 2003, and made a great thing of presenting me with a voucher for a free night stay, breakfast included, sent in by the Elk City Holiday Inn Express. Not that I was going to take them up on it. These short breaks from the routine of home and movie making make me hanker for more. I'd never really traveled on my own because by the time I was 16, I was totally focused on becoming a professional actor. Holidays were spent stitching sacks in a potato shed, cleaning cars at a garage, and dressed in waders clutching a barrel, scooping rancid fish, stiff with rigor mortis, out of festering pools at a trout farm, all to pay for the next term's tuition and living expenses at drama school. But I had loved camping, traveling with my parents to Brittany and Kamastara, where my uncle and mentor, Dennis Lawson, shot Local Hero with Burt Lancaster in the early 80s. I loved that beach and the little camping ground nearby. It put camping in my blood and made me appreciate the liberating virtues of self-sufficiency. Gradually, a trip started to take shape in my head. I'd mentioned to Charlie the idea of riding down to Spain with our wives, but it was something that we were going to do when the kids were older. I couldn't wait that long. I wanted to do something sooner, much sooner. One Saturday afternoon, therefore, I headed off to a map shop in Primrose Hill with Clara, my eldest daughter. I bought a very basic world map, spread it out on a pool table in my basement, indulged in a bit of daydreaming. My wife had grown up in China, so I thought of writing there. Then I noticed that if I headed from Mongolia north into Siberia, instead of south to China, it wasn't that much further east to the edge of Asia. Once there, it was only a relative short leap across the Bering Strait to Alaska. And from Alaska, I reckoned, surely it would be hard top all the way across North America, London to New York, the long way round. It had an appealing, exciting ring to it. I was looking at it when Charlie phoned. "I think you ought to come over for dinner," I said. By the time Charlie and Ollie arrived, I had made up my mind. Charlie needed little persuading. Knowing that I become obsessive about things as soon as they enter my mind, my wife thought it might be just another madly ambitious scheme, and because it seemed so far away, immediately said,
Of course you should go.
Ollie, although supportive, was taken aback. She knew how determined I am to see things through, and she realized probably more than any of us what we were letting ourselves in for. I had 3 more films to shoot: Big Fish, the 3rd episode of Star Wars, and Stay. Then I would be free. I'd take 3 or 4 months off, I figured, and we'd do the trip in the spring of 2004. The first thing we'd do was to buy Adventure Motorcycling Handbook. The first word of Chapter 1 left from the page. Prepare, it warned. As a rule, a first-time multinational transcontinental journey, such as crossing Africa, the Americas, or Asia, needs at the very least 1 year of preparation, it said, emphasizing 1 year in bold type. If you're heading right around the world, double that time, 2 years. My Los Angeles agent was nervous enough about me taking a few months off as it was. I couldn't afford to take 2 years off for career reasons, and the need to earn a living meant Charlie couldn't afford to work for 2 years. It was out of the question for both of us. Yet the book, regarded as the Bible for motorcycle circumnavigation, said it would take that long to plan the journey and map out the route, organize visas, permits, and other documents, select and prepare the right motorbike, learn basic medical and mechanic skills, get the vaccination, source the camping equipment and motorcycle spares, learn languages, get fit, and generally prepare yourselves. It looked like the trip would remain forever a pipe dream. Then we hit on a way to make it work. We would film the trip and sell it as a television series. Surely there would be interest in 2 well-known actors circumnavigating the globe, and that would finance a production company to help us with the preparation. We would concentrate on the bikes, the physical preparation, and choosing the equipment. The production staff would help us with the paperwork, source the equipment, and deal with logistics. If we produced it ourselves, we would retain control of the filming and ensure the spirit of the trip. Two friends alone on the road, surviving on their wits, a friendship united in adversity, would not be forgotten. As I had those 3 films slated for 2003, we decided that Charlie would take on the responsibility of finding the producers.
Charlie. It was April 2003, and I was in London when the call came in. It was Ewan.
I'm taking January to August off next year.
He boomed down the line, his voice filled with excitement.
Let's do it then. I've spoken to my agents in London and LA, and I've blocked 8 months out of the calendar. What have you done about the producers?
Caught on the hop, I bluffed. Oh, yeah, loads. I've got a few people to meet. I've got a few meetings lined up, I said. Then I put down the phone, stared out of the window, and just thought, fuck. Unfortunately, in my wallet I had the business card of a very energetic and ambitious producer I'd met at a party about 2 weeks earlier. Russ Malkin was brash and cocky. Essential qualities in a good producer, and ran a production company called Image Wizard that specialized in taking on television challenges that no one else would consider possible. He'd earned a place in the Guinness Book of Records for making the fastest ever feature film, 13 days from start to finish, including writing the script, shooting, editing, and projection at a charity premiere in London. He obviously knew how to get things done against very tight deadlines. He'd produced programs about power boat racing and other adrenaline sports, and he was a biker, so he understood the passion for speed and the draw of the open road. Russ seemed to be just the man we needed. I met Russ and told him our plans. Ewan was coming to town, so I arranged another meeting. Then Ewan canceled, and I could tell that Russ was becoming increasingly suspicious, unsure that there really was a Ewan involved, and if he was involved, that he would ever appear. Fortunately, Ewan turned up at the next appointment. He hit it off with Russ, and we went on a tour of big league independent television production companies. At every single one, we heard the same spiel. Yeah, we can do it, no problem. We'll get the BBC involved. They'll put up the money, leave it to us. We'll take care of it all. It all sounded very impressive, but it was the last thing we wanted to hear. Our dream of 2 mates on the road was in danger of being taken over by corporate executives with ponytails, dressed in the Soho uniform of baggy jeans, t-shirts over long-sleeve tops, and baseball caps. Ewan had learned the hard way that it was important to retain control several years earlier, when he had a film about polar bears near Churchill on the Hudson Bay in northern Canada. The production company re-edited and sold it to broadcasters around the world, making a mint of it, but Ewan, who would have given his share to the polar bear conservationists, wasn't entitled to a penny. It taught Ewan that spending a few weeks seeing something entirely new was a much more fulfilling holiday than lying on a beach, and that he had a taste for adventure. And it taught us that if we were going to make a television series, then we wanted to dictate the terms. But how? Russ's answers was to enlist David Alexanian, an old friend from Los Angeles, who made low-budget independent feature films. With his sister Alexis, who had a long track record producing major studio and independent films. David specialized in projects that other producers shied away from, the kind of adventure that don't fall into some easily defined category and which rely on passion, integrity, and imagination instead of big budgets and formulaic production values. Russ said he needed David, the commencement negotiator who had made his money on Wall Street, to broker an American deal. We met David and immediately liked him. He was clearly a player, a typical LA deal maker, somebody who made things happen come what may, but who was not ashamed of showing his passion for someone and who was generous in every way. Most importantly, David was also a biker, and Russ assured us would understand and protect the spirit of our adventure. In September, Russ, David, and I flew to Sydney, where Ewan was finishing shooting on Episode 3 of Star Wars prequels. We hired 2 Yamaha Super Tenere trail bikes and took off into the outback, where David and Russ shot a video of us that we could use to pitch our idea to broadcasters. After Star Wars, Ewan flew to New York to shoot Stay. Working his arse off on his third back-to-back film to justify taking most of the next year off. Ewan had taken only 8 days off in the previous 12 months, and with only a short while to go before his planned career break, Ewan's family and agents, who had originally thought our scheme was no more than an ideal fantasy of a man yearning for some relief from a highly pressured career, were starting to take the trip seriously. Meanwhile, my friends and most of my family just humored me every time I mentioned it. Ewan had lined the inside of his trailer on the Stay set in New York with maps of the countries we hoped to pass through and was meticulously planning the journey. In London, however, nothing was going right. We had no bikes or offices, no money, no staff, no camping equipment, no bike gear. Nothing but a dream, and Ewan badgering us to get a television deal double quick.
Ewan. In December, Russ and David flew to the U.S. to meet with my Los Angeles agent. They knew I was doing a trip. I had been very open with them, and they knew I had blocked the time off. Unfortunately, the meeting didn't go as well as we'd hoped. My agents weren't sure that people would be interested in our television series. Without TV support, we would really struggle to finance the trip. I phoned up Charlie from my car. "Charlie, my agents aren't sure we'll get a deal," I said. I could tell he was devastated. Having given up his work for the next year, I could hear in Charlie's voice that his world had fallen away. He had pinned his hopes on the trip and on the television series to finance it, but now he had to face going home to Ollie and telling her, maybe no one will buy it. For the first time since I'd hatched my plan and got Charlie on board, our dream trip was in jeopardy. As the implications sank in, I began to think of it as a small disaster. But to Charlie, who had no work booked after Christmas, who was about to go away for the holiday break, and for whom money was tight, it was a nightmare, and he panicked about it.
"Hang on a minute, guys,"
he said.
"We are in the process of selling the foreign rights to the television series. Someone clearly thinks it's interesting enough to want to watch it, and there's got to be money there to make it work."
But my agent's concern made us wonder. Perhaps no one would buy our program or find it interesting. After all, we hadn't been able to convince a big Hollywood agency, my agency. My immediate response was that we would have to find some way to fund the trip ourselves. I was about to broach the subject with my wife when she said,
You should start looking into a way of doing the trip without David and Russ, without any television deal or any other way of funding it, without anything. Just look into how you are going to do the trip. Fund it yourself.
Ev's unprompted endorsement was just what we needed to hear. It made us realize she was absolutely behind us. Her support restored our confidence. We knew a film of our journey was a good idea. Everyone we had spoken to seemed interested in it, so we phoned David and Russ, wondering what they might have said at the meeting. We told them to stay in LA, but they were one step ahead. They had already met with William Morris, another large TV and film agency, who seemed excited about the project. They had lined up a series of meetings with broadcasters in January. The trip might be back on. Meanwhile, in London, we were searching for offices. We needed somewhere like a garage to prepare our bikes, but also with office space for the production staff and an editing suite. For weeks we trudged around promises all over the city. Most were ludicrously expensive, others were too small or too far out of town. Depressed by the troubles we'd had in LA and bored by visiting empty, unsuitable buildings, Charlie rode up outside an unproposing block in a residential street in Shepherd's Bush in West London a few days before Christmas. Dejected and tired, he was on the point of not bothering to view the property. But when he went inside, it was a revelation. It had a workshop which opened straight out onto the street with a roll-up metal shutter to let the bikes in. There was a kitchen and office downstairs, and more rooms upstairs. It was perfect. With only days left to Christmas, our adventure was suddenly taking shape. All we needed now was to test and get hold of some bikes, kit them out with touring equipment, order spares, source some camping gear, work out the route, organize visas and documentation, do some off-road training, and secure a television deal to pay for it all. So not much pressure then.